Hello, my name is Frisbee Sheffield and I teach ancient philosophy. In this series of lectures we'll be discussing Plato's Symposium. Plato's Symposium is one of his best known and most loved works. The Symposium was written in the second half of the 380s BC. It's an account of a fictional symposium, which literally means a drinking together, set in the house of the Athenian tragic poet Agathon to celebrate his first victory in 416 BC in one of the great dramatic festivals. Those present are amongst the intellectual elite of the day, including an exponent of heroic poetry, an expert in law, a representative of medical expertise, a comic poet, a tragic poet, and of course a philosopher. Each speaker provides an account of a certain kind of love, and so this is the work from which we draw much of our understanding of what has come to be known as Platonic love. The dialogue is specifically concerned with eros, a particular kind of love which the Greeks distinguish from the love one might feel towards family and friends, and for which they typically used philia and cognate terms. Eros, the subject of this dialogue, denoted passionate love or desire, a kind of intense, obsessional longing, of which sexual desire was a prime example. But eros had a wide semantic range. It could refer to a variety of objects of intense longing, beyond the love of persons. It seems to have had at least two distinguishing characteristics. First, there was a strong connection between eros and beauty, as we will see in the speeches in this dialogue. When you desire something with eros, you perceive the object to be beautiful in some way. Second, eros is used to describe desires that become obsessional and the central focus of a person's life. So this does not refer to desires for a bit of cake or a walk, for example. We might reasonably wonder why this kind of passionate desire should be of interest to Plato, preoccupied as he is with the life of reason and philosophy. Although the topic of this dialogue might not be a prominent concern for many philosophers today, nor setting their works at a drinking party, perhaps, both these features, in fact, take us deep into the serious business of Plato's ethics. This is largely for two reasons. First, among members of the elite during the 5th and 4th centuries, relationships between an older male lover, an Erastes, and a younger male beloved, an eromenos, were not uncommon. This perhaps reflected the fact that access to women was quite restricted, whilst access to men was less so. Typically in such relationships, an older partner sought sexual favours from a youth on the verge of manhood in return for providing social, political and moral training. Feelings of desire and at best concern for the welfare of one's partner were used in this way for the socially productive end of furthering the education of the young. Now, an important context for such relationships was the Greek symposium, such as the one that forms the setting for this dialogue. Although symposia were places to enjoy the physical pleasures of food, drink and sex, they were also places to cultivate the pleasures of the mind through song and conversation. Indeed, the symposium was a central site for the transmission of a shared cultural and intellectual heritage. After dinner, perhaps with lover and beloved reclining on the same couch, lovers would sing drinking songs or recite poetry and prose to their beloveds. There was a long tradition of sympotic poetry. The content would often reflect on the practices of the symposium itself, and how those gathered together should eat, drink and desire in the right way. The topic of this dialogue, erotic love, was in fact already an established theme in a context that was very much concerned with both arousing and with regulating desire. So this aspect of sympotic literature is appropriated by Plato here with his speeches on eros. The fact that erotic relationships had this educational dimension, and that the symposium was an important context for such relationships, goes some way towards explaining Plato's interest in them. As we might expect from a philosopher who shows so much interest in the good life and how it is achieved, Plato will have much to say about the sorts of values lovers should transmit to their beloveds as they pass the wine cup. Plato's concern with desire and its role in the good life in this and other works suggests that he believed that one's ability to act well and to lead a good life depends in part on desiring the right kinds of things and acting on that basis. What or whom one desires, in other words, determines the choices one makes and affects one's chances for happiness. Consider, for example, the behaviour of Apollodorus, the narrator of this dialogue. He proudly announces that his life has been reorientated around the love of wisdom. Pursuing this goal, he believes, will lead to the kind of happiness simply unavailable to those whose lives are orientated around the pursuit of wealth, rich businessmen, for example. In the speeches themselves, Plato will consider a variety of things thought worthy of desire and pursuit, and at the heart of the dialogue stands the claim that philosophy, which literally means the love of wisdom, philosophia, is central to a happy human life. One of the virtues of the dramatic way that Plato writes, by which I mean the use of character, setting and context, is that Plato embodies his ideas in characters and lives in a way that allows the reader to see the connection between what people argue for and what kind of people they turn out to be. One of the ways in which this is borne out in this dialogue is that the work is marked by a time lapse. It's narrated by Apollodorus years after Agathon's supposed symposium took place. During this time, the Athenians had lost some of the confidence shown here by Agathon and his peers. Just a year after Agathon's victory, Alcibiades, who also appears at the end of this work, had persuaded the Athenians to embark on the doomed Sicilian expedition, a defeat which marked a turning point in the bitter struggle with Sparta, the so-called Peloponnesian War. Two religious scandals also took their toll, the so-called profanation of the sacred mysteries of Eleusis and the mutilation of the Hermes, in which some of the participants of Agathon's symposium were implicated. The lives and loves of each speaker, which are revealed in their speech, may well be Plato's contribution to a post-war debate about such matters. It is as if he is saying to us, might events have been different if the movers and shakers of Athenian culture at this time had thought differently about love and desire? Well, we have already mentioned that the symposium presents a series of speeches on the subject of Eros, and the particular form this takes is that of the encomium or praise speech. One of the speakers, Phaedrus, claims that Eros hasn't received proper praise up to this point, something which might refer to the fact that although Eros received a lot of treatment in poetry and prose before, for example in the works of Sappho and in Greek tragedies, Eros was perceived as an ambivalent force, powerful and dangerous that could lead to good or ill. It was a tragic passion, something which can bring devastation to those subject to it. Consider how it is connected to madness in the second and third stasima of the Antigone, for example, by Sophocles. Or consider its effects on Phaedra in Euripides' Hippolytus, or Medea in the Medea. Eros often characterises the way in which tragic heroes embrace their own destruction. The encomiastic format of Plato's Symposium, by contrast, will allow for none of that. It requires a focus on the praiseworthy characteristics of Eros, so what will be in focus here are its beneficial effects on a human life. Compared to many other of Plato's works, in which he uses the dialogue form, the form of this particular work is quite distinctive. In many other dialogues, for example, Socrates is pitted against some contemporary figure whose claims to expertise in some area he examines and refutes. Though we see an example of this in the Symposium, the bulk of the work consists in rather long speeches. Since the dialogue is combative in nature, though, with each speaker attempting to outdo his predecessor, and with Socrates' speech occupying centre stage, the centrality of philosophy to a proper understanding of the topic is made clear, I think. But although Socrates maintains critical distance from his peers, the previous speeches need not be read as extraneous to the philosophical core of the work. Rather, they seem to provide the reader with a sense of the agreements and disagreements on the topic, and to clarify issues that a clear and explanatory account of the matter must resolve. In that sense, the account of Eros is something that emerges from consideration of the whole dialogue.